Enjoy this Wild Soul Gathering production. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie. Pour yourself a really tall glass of spiritual curiosity and join me for the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. In the spirit of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life.
Enjoy this Art of the Nervous System replay.
I'm Dr. Sandra Marie, and a big welcome to all our listeners. Happy to have you here. Today I'm sharing something a little different. This conversation originally unfolded as a 3-part series during the Wild Souls Gathering Art of Nervous System Care Summit. Rather than replaying those sessions separately, I brought them together so you can experience Sarah Saxby's story as it was meant to unfold, from a lifetime of bracing and trying to manage her nervous system through the collapse of structures that once made her feel safe and ultimately into a very different experience of presence. Sarah isn't offering a formula or telling you that her path should be yours. She's sharing what happened when she began questioning whether the problem was her nervous system or the life she was asking it to tolerate. Let's begin with part 1.
Hi, everybody. This is Sarah Saxby of the Soul Rehab Project. Very happy to be a part of this summit, a part of speaking on nervous system regulation from a place of experience. I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to speak over the next 3 days and share with you the evolution of my experience with nervous system regulation and how I arrived ultimately at a place where my nervous system is still. Because I arrived at a place of presence, a place I've never been before in my life. And I know that I arrived there because it's all relative. I've never been speaking or living in a state of presence where every moment of my life is inhabited until now. And because of that, because of the work that I've done, I have arrived here and the regulation of my nervous system no longer takes any work. It just is. So over the 3 days, I'm going to evolve my story of how I got here. Today, sharing with you my story of how I was in a consistent state of management, trying to manage my issues, my life, my stress, my anxiety, like most people, right? There were so many things that I was doing, but inevitably, I still felt the same. And I could honestly say that my entire life, maybe adult life, my entire life, I lived in a state of, the way that I can explain it is bracing. I braced myself. I braced myself for the worst in every area of my life. I expected the floor to drop in every area. If I started dating someone, I expected that person to leave me. If I was in a particular friend group, I expected to, maybe say something that upset someone and I'd inevitably lose those friends. I expected at a job that something would happen. I don't know if I thought that I would get fired necessarily because, like many of you, I was a really good worker, right? Although I never felt like I belonged in those places, I did the best I could, played by all the rules, did what I needed to do to get a paycheck. But I always felt that there would be something that would go wrong and I would lose money somehow. I wouldn't get paid. I can honestly say that the majority of my life was bracing myself for the worst, expecting the floor to drop, expecting to go without. And that's a very anxious, stressful place to live from. Like most people, there's a multi-billion-dollar industry out there that's going to help you feel better. Feel better in your situation. However my life was structured, there's plenty of things out there to help me feel better in my life. And believe me when I tell you, I did just about everything. I read books. I read books just about everything, becoming more present and becoming more intuitive and you name it, trying to figure out how to structure my day and how to maybe journal about things. And I meditated, I journaled, I created vision boards. I studied astrology. I had a spiritual teacher for many, many, many years. I loved to hike. I started running. I saw an herbalist. I got acupuncture. I was seeing a chiropractor. I saw somebody for energy work. I took the classes, the workshops, the retreats. I did it all. But I was doing all of these things while keeping my life intact. So just a little background of where I was living. Even going back the last 10 years. I was for 5.5 years, I was in an extremely abusive relationship. And when I was in this relationship, it was the first time I could breathe financially, right? Because I could share the burden. If the refrigerator broke, I had somebody to share the burden with, right? If my car broke down, I had somebody else's car that I could, because most of my life I've been by myself. And I traded my truth for a little security. However, that relationship was extremely abusive, not physically, so you could see it, but coercively, every way you could possibly imagine. I was being controlled. I wasn't myself. But when you're always bracing for the floor to drop out, you'll be, I was taught generationally from generations before me, taught me that it doesn't matter what your circumstances are like, security is number one. And so that I carried that with me. And so regardless of how bad the relationship was, regardless of how much I was being controlled and abused and manipulated, it was better than the alternative. At least I was secure. I was sharing life's load with someone, right? Somebody could change a light bulb for me. And not only that, I was working at a job, a company, for many years that was abusive. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this, that you pretend you don't see things. You pretend you don't hear things because you need a paycheck. And a lot of times if you say things anyway, nobody does anything about it. And that's pretty much how this was. I worked in a hierarchy, and the hierarchy protected the hierarchy, for lack of a better way to say it. And so even though there was passive aggressiveness and, threats and things behind the scenes, you just pretended that it wasn't that. I pretended I didn't see things and hear things. One, because I didn't think anybody would do anything about it anyway. And two, I needed a paycheck. I couldn't live without one, right? So here I am. I'm being abused at home. There's an insurmountable amount of pressure. because I had to go home every day and know that I was going to be controlled. I wasn't allowed to, I mean, I say I wasn't allowed, but that's how it felt anyway. So I just, I stopped going out with friends and I stopped talking to friends because I couldn't do it on my own. He always had to be involved and I couldn't spend any money. I just stopped living my life at home and I had to follow his rules or I wouldn't be able to go to sleep because of the lectures. And so the lesser of two evils was my job at that point. Although the job was abusive, the job was extremely taxing mentally, psychologically. And there was a lot of pressure because you're making rich people richer, right? And if the rich people don't get what they want, they get really pissed and they will speak their mind. And then all of a sudden you look like you're not doing enough. You look like you're incapable. And that's a lot of pressure. So it was, no matter where I was, at home or at work, I was living. It was like I had weights around my ankles, around my wrists, around everything. And it didn't matter. There was no escape from it. And so my nervous system was just at this all-time high. And there was no way for me to relax. There was no place for me to relax. I could never be by myself because I was either at work or I was at home with a narcissist who God forbid I ever spend 5 minutes by myself because I might remember when times were better. So there was never any pressure release. And I went to school for holistic nutrition. So believe me, I was eating well. I was taking all of the vitamins. I was reading all the books, taking all the classes. I had a spiritual teacher, right? Going to see an acupuncturist, getting chiropractic adjustments, running, walking, hiking, doing everything, breathing, journaling. And yes, maybe it brought a little bit of relaxation. But at the end of the day, I was still living the same life. So if you think about the life I was living as a prison, and I was in a prison cell, I can invite somebody to do acupuncture on me, right? I can invite somebody in. Somebody can hand me a book inside my cell. I could take a workshop from inside my cell. I could talk to my spiritual teacher. I could take vitamins and eat well. I could even walk around the prison. But what's the difference if I'm still inside the prison? How does that make a difference? I haven't changed. I haven't left the prison. I realized that the tools were maybe satisfying something for a little bit. And the tools are great, but they weren't helping me. My life was out of alignment. So those tools weren't helping me get outside of the prison. They weren't helping me align my life. My life was out of alignment, and none of that stuff was going to help me realign. I had to uproot my foundation. I had to get outside of the prison because nothing was helping me. And I realized that. So tomorrow I'm going to talk more about what I actually did to get back into alignment in my life. What I had to face, where I had to face where I was abandoning myself, betraying myself every day. I had to face where I was pretending I didn't hear something, pretending I didn't see something. I had to face all of those places. I had to risk the floor dropping out. And that's what I would like to talk about tomorrow. So we will see you all then.
There's an important distinction in what Sarah just described. She wasn't saying the tools were useless. She was recognizing that no amount of regulation could change the circumstances she was asking herself to remain in. And that raises a much harder question. What happens when feeling better is no longer enough because something in your life actually needs to change? That's where the next part of Sarah's story begins. Here's part 2.
Hi, everyone. It's Sarah Saxby of the Soul Rehab Project, and I'm so happy to be back for day 2, back at the summit, very important summit. And I really appreciate being here, so thank you all for being here as well. And as I mentioned yesterday, my story over the 3 days of this summit is going to evolve. Yesterday, I spoke of more of like management from the position of living in a way that I was bracing myself for the Florida dropout. I lived my life waiting for something bad to happen, and how much stress and pressure that puts on a nervous system. To today, which I'm going to talk about collapse. I spoke about yesterday how it was like I was living inside a prison, trying to regulate myself from inside the prison walls. And how I knew something had to change because my life was out of alignment. So today I'm going to talk about what I did to get myself back into alignment, what I had to go through and experience and face. And tomorrow I will talk about arriving in a state of presence where my system is regulated because of the work that I've done, because of being in a state of presence. So today I want to talk about the collapse and getting myself outside of the prison. And for those of you that heard the things I said yesterday, I was in a narcissistic relationship. I worked at an abusive job, had no break. My nervous system had no break. And my biggest fear was the floor dropping out from under me. So I spent a lifetime pretending I didn't hear things, didn't see things, allowing myself to be treated in ways that kept my life intact. I didn't want to have to blow up my life, so I would endure whatever I had to endure. So to risk blowing things up. And for whatever reason, I arrived at a place where I could no longer lie to myself. I could no longer abandon me. Why that happened to me, I don't know. And it's not like it just happened overnight. But something inside of me just could no longer live in a way where I could betray myself. And so things started to happen. And within my narcissistic relationship, I was there because it provided security. It provided stability. And I was always told that's the way. Doesn't matter what you're enduring on the outside, stability is number one. So although I was being abused every day of my life, I was stable, but I had to face that. And I did. And I left it. Knowing that anything had to be better than living in an environment where I had no control, no autonomy. I had no past. I didn't have a past. It was erased. I wasn't allowed to talk about it. Wasn't allowed to think about it. Didn't matter what it was. And I missed me. And it was like, no matter how much therapy we had, no matter how much we talked to our spiritual teachers, the books we read, the retreats we went on, the workshops we took, the journaling, we tried all that. It wasn't helping. The only thing that I could do was leave that environment, and I did. And it wasn't easy. But I got out. I got my a home for me and my children, not his, mine. And I went through a lot. I ended up in the emergency room a couple times because of the PTSD. It was wild. I was having nightmares where he was moving into the home that I bought on my own, and he wouldn't leave. So it was very stressful, and I had to figure things out once again, back on my own, which I always found myself. Here I go, back on my own again. Got to figure things out on my own. Have to be my own security, have to find my own stability. But I was still working the abusive job. So I started to do a meditation before I would go into this job. And I would speak out loud and I would just say, I know this isn't where I'm supposed to be. I know I'm here to do more than this. I'm not utilizing my gifts, my strengths. I'm shrinking myself to go in here every day. I know that. I'm aware of that. So please show me where I'm supposed to be. And I spoke those words to myself for about 3 months before I was inevitably fired. And mind you, I was always a good, obedient worker. I worked for 35 years. I started working when I was 15. And I was always showed up, always on time, always a great worker, never got written up. And here I was fired because I spoke up about the absolute threats and just nonsense that was going on behind the scenes within the hierarchy, right? And so I spoke up in a meeting and spoke my truth and spoke it loud, and I have no regrets. But I got fired. And they made up one thing and said that I did other things, but it's whatever. And so here I am on my own. I don't have a partner to fall back on. Certainly don't have child support to fall back on. Didn't have a job, didn't have an identity anymore. Who the hell am I? Once I don't have a job, once I don't have a partner, who am I? And so what I had tried to avoid for 50 years, I was experiencing. I had no floor, no net, no one. And I was trying to work with a spiritual teacher. I was trying to read books, trying to do things, going and getting energy work and all of these things that are great. But I felt like they couldn't reach me anymore. It's like I was screaming, going, no, it's not helping. And I'm just in this void. It was like I was just free falling in a void for I don't know how long. I had no structure. No money. What am I doing? And I would try to grip on to the bars of my prison, and they were slippery and they were hot, and I couldn't do it. And so I can't tell you how many moments, days, crying, screaming, punching pillows in a fetal position, going, what am I going to do? Gosh, it's still very, it's like, wow, I was in that position where my biggest fear was happening. I didn't have anybody to catch me. I had nothing to catch me. And no matter how hard I reached back to the prison and asked them to take me back as an inmate, they wouldn't. And I'm like, what? Screaming, what? What am I here to do? What am I supposed to be doing? And help me find something. Help me. Who am I? Because if you think about, if you're no longer a girlfriend, a wife, a worker, name your position. Who are you? And I just felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Yes, it was different though, because I was outside of the prison. I was outside of an abusive relationship, an abusive job. I was standing outside of it, sort of floating, but it was dark and it was endless. And so there was pressure and there was stress and I was crying and I was in a fetal position and I didn't know which way to, I didn't have anything to hold on to anymore. But at some point in time, I let it sit. I let myself feel it because nothing was happening to me. If I stood back for a minute, yes, I'm in a void. Anyone outside still, in the prison, right? Anyone within the prison, which is where most people function, looking at me going, what the hell's up with this girl, right? Why isn't she working? What is she doing all day? Why is she sitting by herself? Why isn't she posting on social media? And what happened? Probably look like a psychopath, right? Because I just fell into this space where my spiritual teacher that I'd been with for 10 years couldn't read me anymore. She was giving me advice that felt like it was for a person that no longer existed. She was telling me, offering guidance, and I was like, what? No. I was getting, I've gotten astrology readings from the same person for years, and I got one and she was saying things and I said, what are you talking about? That's not me. Who are you talking to? That doesn't make any sense. And I was no longer, I felt like no one could help me. I felt like no one would understand where I was coming from, and friends that I had had before. It's like they weren't around anymore. And I didn't want anyone to ask, what's going on with you? How are you doing? Because I didn't know what to say. Because I was okay. But coming from a view inside the structure, inside a prison, it looked like I was insane. How did I get outside the prison, and how are you living outside of it? Because the prison has structure. You know what you're doing every day. You have an identity inside the prison. You have ways to regulate yourself. You have books to read and classes to take and constant reaching for something outside of you to feel better, right? And I didn't feel like I needed to reach anymore. And it was the wildest place to be, but I had to sit with myself and say, wait a minute, am I okay? Because once you sit with the fear, I sat with it. Something I never did in the 50 years of my life because I was constantly bracing. I mean, I'm surprised my shoulders aren't like up to here because my entire life was bracing. My entire life I expected what? To what? I just expected the worst. And so I threw myself into the fire. I didn't wait for the fire to envelop me. I threw myself in the fire. I got myself fired. I knew that was going to happen. Are you kidding me? Did I think they were going to change because of what I said? No, hell no. I threw myself into the fire. And it was hot. I was outside the prison walls. I was outside of structure for the first time in my life. I was outside of my identity. And I sat there. It was burning, but I sat. And at some point, something inside of me calibrated because I realized I was okay. I was okay. And once I realized that even though the floor wasn't there anymore and I was still here, I realized I was sitting in presence. And I would not have known that if I didn't come from a place of not being in presence. I came from a place of trying to feel better inside of my prison while I was misaligned in my life, lying to myself, betraying myself, abandoning who I really am in every area of my life. I was doing that. But it wasn't until I faced those things and looked at myself and said, I can no longer betray you. You are everything. I sat in the fire, let it burn me. And I recalibrated. So that's what I want to talk about tomorrow. I want to talk about what it feels like to live outside of that. Because it's like it's me regulated. It's me still in a stillness that I would have never gotten to if I was still living in misalignment. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate so much being here, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
What strikes me about this part of Sarah's story is that the things she had spent her life trying to prevent finally happened. The floor dropped out. And yet, underneath all of the fear and uncertainty, she discovered that she was still there. That doesn't make what she went through easy, and it doesn't mean dismantling your life is the answer. This is Sarah's experience. But it does invite an interesting question. How much of what we call safety comes from actually feeling safe? And how much comes from keeping familiar structures intact? In this final part, Sarah describes what began to emerge when she stopped trying to rebuild the life she had left behind.
Hi, everyone. It's Sarah Saxby of the Soul Rehab Project. And this is day 3 of the summit. And I'm very pleased to be here and to have been a part of this. So thank you all for being here. And as I had mentioned before, my story over the last 3 days is one of evolution. I'm sharing my experience of how I arrived at a state of presence where my nervous system is regulated by default. And day 1, I spoke of my situation, bracing myself for the bottom to drop out in my life at all times. Yesterday, day 2, I spoke about actually leaving everything that caused the misalignment of my life and arriving at a state of presence. And today I would like to talk about what it's like to exist in a state of presence, how I realized this is where I'm speaking from, and what it's like to be here, what it's like to live in a state of stillness. It might not be what you think, because I know for myself, I thought that it would be some magical place where nothing ever happens and it's wonderful and there's no stress, and that's not true. But I will tell you that no matter what goes on internally, it's still. And I'm going to explain that. So one of the things that happened, well, for starters, I realized that once I calibrated and I faced all of my lies and my betrayal, and I sat in that void for long enough, and the script, the prison, the illusion, whatever you want to call it, wouldn't take me back, no matter how hard I tried. So I sat in that void. I sat in that fire rather than be able to grip on to something like I always have in the past for security. I sat there and I calibrated, and I came out the other side very still internally, but you don't automatically know. It's kind of like somebody blindfolded you, spun you around, drove you somewhere, and kicked you out of the car, and you had to figure out where you were. That's how I felt. But one thing that I noticed is that I no longer reached for outside guidance because it didn't feel like it was doing anything. It didn't feel like it mattered. So I had a spiritual teacher my entire life. And nothing she said felt like it made any sense. And I no longer felt like I needed to meditate because I was already felt like the state you try to reach during meditation I was living in. That's how it felt. I stopped praying. And I was like, wow, that's weird. But I stopped praying because, and I always loved talking to like guides, spirits and things, but I was like, they're all here. Everything is here right now. Who am I talking to? They're here. It's all here. It exists right now. And another thing that happened was I had a friend tell me that she went on vacation, just her and her 17-year-old son for a week. And I was like, this is how I figure this out. And so when she was telling me, I said, well, what did you guys do all day? And she said, well, I don't know, went to the beach and I don't know, got food. And using my new math, I said, well, that's 3 hours. What did you do for the rest of the 12 hours or whatever? She was like, huh? And I said, there's time that's unaccounted for. What did you do the whole time? This was a week, 7 days. I mean, even if you rode bikes, okay, that's an hour. You went to this restaurant, that's an hour. Like there's time unaccounted for. And I would do this to people. I did this to more than just my friend. It was like, I would ask people what they were doing their entire day because what they said they didn't add up in my head. There was too much time left. No, what did you do that whole time? And I realized nobody could answer that question. And I realized that it was two different frameworks. It was almost like I was speaking a different language. I wasn't really asking, tell me physically what you did the entire time. What I was asking was, what maintained your consciousness for the entire day? From the time you woke up to the time you went to sleep, what maintained your awareness? And the truth is, the entire time is not that you're spending, that using my friend as an example, the entire time there wasn't awareness. There was awareness maybe at the beach. There was awareness maybe riding bikes. But all the other time around that was sleeping. Your awareness isn't on. And the thing that I noticed was that my awareness was on from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep. It's even on when I'm sleeping. Because that's a whole nother issue. That was a whole nother thing, trying to actually fall asleep because my awareness was on the whole time. My body doesn't know that just because it's dark and quiet, it's time to go to sleep, because it's always quiet. When you're experiencing every single minute as deep, lush, and continuous. And that's what I'm doing now. Every minute of my day, there's no gray space where my awareness goes to sleep, where it goes back to sleep. Every minute is spent, I call it deep, lush, and continuous. Every minute. And so I'm looking at people going, no. What are you doing the whole time? And the truth is, most of our days are spent asleep with a few flickers of awareness. And after the work that I did, after the work I did on myself, after I faced my misalignment, and I faced being in the void, and I stayed in that void, I stayed in that fire, and I faced my fear, I came out the other side, sure, disoriented, wondering what's happening. But the one constant was that internally there's a stillness. And there wasn't anything that anyone could help me with. Because my inner knowing, my inner authority is what's guiding me now. And everything I reached for is here. It's all here with me right now. And I want to be clear that I know I'm speaking from a place of presence. And I did the work to get here. I'm now living in alignment because I'm no longer going into a job I had to, pretend I liked. I'm no longer in relationships where I have to shrink myself or pretend to be something I'm not. Because of that, I woke up in pure presence. But I do want to say that even though I'm speaking from a place of presence, I still have all the range of emotions. There's still an intensity. I'm still feeling everything. There's just no swing. There's no crash. There's no come down. Regardless of what I'm doing, I could be on a roller coaster. I could be at a beach. I could be sitting in my living room. There's a constant. It's continuous. So I can feel the excitement of being on a roller coaster. I could feel the beauty of being at a beach, and I can be in my living room. Still, it all feels the same. I still cry. I still laugh. I still enjoy things. But what's constant is the stillness and the fact that my awareness never goes to sleep. It's on all the time. I spoke recently about vacation. And I got a lot of interesting comments because it was people who are still using vacations to escape their misalignment. The life that they built that is not aligned. So vacationing is one of those things that you escape to get away from the pressure of your life, from the resistance. Because typically when you're on vacation, I'm going to check my baggage at the door, and I'm just going to enjoy and not have to worry about anything for a week or whatever the time frame is. And I had said that once I reached this state of presence, one thing that I noticed was that it didn't matter where I was physically. And I'm sitting here looking at snow right now. And if somebody said to me, well, I'll give you an option for free. You can go work on a beach somewhere, or you can stay here in the snow. And I realized for the first time in my life, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. And I spent the majority of my life, like most people, saying, wow, I'd so much rather be on a beach. I'd so much rather be able to just wear a tank top and shorts and flip-flops. But now it doesn't matter. I wouldn't feel any different whether I was on a beach or in the snow, whether it was raining. It doesn't matter. Internally, there's calmness that doesn't change because of where I'm at, because of what I'm reading, because of what I'm listening to, because of what someone's telling me to do. It's always still, with all the range of emotions, all the intensity. It's not that there's no stress, there's no pressure. Nothing outside looks different. I don't look different. It's internal. Everything is already here with me right now. So it makes no sense to change my location. If I do want to go see something, it'll be because I really want to go experience something. Maybe I'll go visit some beautiful location and see how I feel when I'm there. It'll be exciting. Like what does presence feel like in other locations? But it will be because I feel like doing it right now. It's not going to be because I feel like it's going to make me feel better. It's not going to. It doesn't matter. I came to a place where I realized that I was living a life of misalignment. My nervous system was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It was telling me your life is not aligned. And regardless of the things that I did to try to come back into alignment, I was still living the same exact life. My life looked exactly the same. And I realized that until I uprooted those things that were causing the misalignment in the first place, I was going to be on an endless path of decorating the walls of my prison. So whatever it was inside of me that said, you're no longer going to abandon yourself, you need to be true to who you are. And I realized what I have done to myself over the years, and how I betrayed myself, and how I abandoned myself, and how I lied and shrunk myself to fit into places I should have never been. It was all by design. It was all perfect. But it wasn't until I faced those things and started living a life that was more aligned with who I am, who I truly am. And I'm not going to say it was easy, but everybody's different. My experience doesn't mean that that's going to be your experience. The difficulty, the crying in a fetal position, the begging, the screaming, the tears. I mean, to get me to where I am, I wouldn't trade a thing. And now I'm living in a place where it's not structured. It's very open. I feel every day. I feel, what do I want to do today? What do I want to speak on? Maybe it's nothing. But I no longer live with a secure floor. It doesn't exist anymore. And I'm still here, and I'm still okay. I feel everything. But at the core, it's solid, it's still, it's continuous, and it's lush. It's deep. And I feel every minute. But that's because I can look in the mirror and say, I'm no longer betraying myself. I'm no longer shrinking. So again, I really, really appreciate the summit. I appreciate being a part of it and amongst so many people who are truly dedicating their lives to helping people. And I hope my story helps. It helps orient you, helps give you some sort of direction or orientation. And I appreciate being here. So thanks, everyone.
Sarah's story leaves us with a question I think is worth sitting with. What if we're using nervous system regulation to tolerate something our body is actually telling us needs to change? Sometimes we need tools that help us move through stress, uncertainty, and difficult seasons. And sometimes discomfort may be information asking us to look more closely at how we live. Sarah's experience is her own, but the question it raises belongs to all of us. What changes when we stop asking, how do I feel better? And begin asking, what is this trying to tell me? Thank you for joining me for this special happy hour presentation. To learn more about Sarah and her work, you can go to her website, strategiesforhappiness.com. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on YouTube. And if you'd like to explore these topics more deeply, visit wildsoulsgathering.com, where you'll find free resources and guided practices designed to support your own journey of curiosity, healing, and personal growth. This is Dr. Sandra Marie, sending each of you peace and love.